Lesson 1.
Education Paradigm Shift from Contents to Outcomes. A topic from Assessment in Learning 1. To start with, let's have this picture. So the picture shows people repainting the wall. This picture also shows that we need to change for the better. We do things differently to produce a different outcome. Same with the educational system. So what are some changes in the educational system nowadays? So in the past, old generation education, the setting was the students do activities, answer quizzes, and the teachers deliver instruction. The learning is linear. This means that the only source of information is the teacher. And teachers deliver instructions using low-end technologies. Students listen, then after the instruction, students study, learn the subject and the topics. Then they will take the quiz. Then the teacher gives an assignment, and students go to the library to seek for information, knowledge, and a lot more. Then they graduate from school. So as you can see, we focus on the contents, on the subject. But in the 21st century, it is now different. We will not focus on the content, but we will focus on the outcome. And to achieve the outcomes, students are given different technologies like computer, internet, headphones, books. They are exposed in different environments. Learning is not only limited to the classroom, but also into the real world. Students perform tasks, produce projects, and teachers use different multimedia like computer, laptops, internet, whiteboards, interactive whiteboards, projectors, as well as the students. Students does not only study from their books, but they also apply their learnings into real-world tasks. Here, in the 21st century, in the outcomes-based education, this is not anymore focus about the content and what the teacher discusses, but it focuses more on the student or the learners. Then students graduate. So the advent of technology caused a change of perspective in education, nationally and internationally. The teacher ceased to be the sole source of knowledge. With knowledge explosion, students are surrounded with various sources of facts and information accessible through user-friendly technology. The teacher now has become a facilitator of knowledge who assists in the organization, interpretation, and validation of acquired facts and information. So let us have this picture. What can you say about this picture? Yes, this small missile is what we call as the dart, and this red and white board is what we call as the dart board. So in playing this dart game, you will need to focus on the centermost mark, and that means a bullseye. So how do you relate this to the concept of objectives? So in playing the dart game, you will need to focus on your targets. You will bear in mind that you will need to hit the target or to obtain the objectives. And what is the teacher's role on objective setting? So in the educational setting, the teacher's role is to identify the objectives, the overall outcome, prepare the students, prepare herself, design specific approach or teaching strategy, implement the strategy or implement the instruction, facilitate the learning, and assist or make an assessment. Now comment on the Peter Hall principle. If you don't know where you are going, you probably end up somewhere else. Yes, it's true. Because if you don't bear in mind the target or the goal or your overall outcome, you will get lost. You might waste time, effort, and money. Take note that bearing in mind your target will give you a direction or sense of purpose. And in doing so, you will save time and you will perform tasks aligned to your targets. That's why it is important to set the target or the outcome in every instruction. So in the traditional setup, in the past, the educational setup was focused on the teacher as the center of the whole process. Because there is limited technology, teachers spend more time giving inputs to their students. They were focused on covering a lot of content. Also, they viewed teaching learning activities as an end, so they put emphasis on their students' outputs. But today, in the outcomes-based education, students now are surrounded with different knowledge, different technologies, and the role of the teacher is facilitation. So in here, we will not focus on the contents, but we will focus on the outcomes. So the role of the teacher will facilitate, assist, support the students' progress, and continue to assess them, to identify their weaknesses, to identify their strengths, and help the students achieve the outcomes. So in this lesson, you will learn the principles involved in outcomes-based education. Because of globalization and the need for these graduates to adopt the changing demands of the industries, not to mention their mobility as well as international accreditation requirements, the educational landscape has shifted from the traditional paradigm to the use of outcomes-based framework. Education now must answer two important questions. First, what do education institutions want their students to become or to be able to do? Second, how are these students helped achieve their expected outcomes? So first, let us discuss about what is an outcome. So an outcome is an end product or result of something. If put in the context of education, outcome means the end result of the entire learning experience of a student. Here, the student will be able to demonstrate all the needed skills and abilities that will make him perform his future job role. For instance, if one is an engineering student, after finishing the 4-year course, he must be able to demonstrate the engineering skills and knowledge he has supposedly acquired. Also, if one is an English studies student, for example, after graduation, this learner must be able to show his knowledge in English studies, perhaps through research, English teaching, speaking, or writing. Another example is our class whereby you are expected to learn what outcome-based instruction is. The teacher must set a learning outcome that at the end of the topic, you as students must be able to demonstrate your knowledge on the concepts of OBE, and this knowledge may be manifested through your performance in a well-designed assessment tools. In other words, there must be some concrete and measurable indicators to determine if you have achieved these outcomes or not. So next question. What is an outcomes-based education, or what does OBE means? So outcomes-based education, according to the father of OBE, Spady, outcomes-based education is a framework that focuses and organizes everything in the educational system around what is essential for all the students to be able to be successful at the end of their learning experience. So that at the end of the learning experience, the student will have achieved these sets of goals or outcomes. So this is the same concept we are seeing in the diagram, in the dartboard. So in the picture, the dartboard, which is the target, is the goal or outcome, while the dart is the design teaching activities that will be activated in order to hit the targets. So if the outcomes are not clearly spelled, all activities may not directly hit the targets, which may result in wasted time, energy, and resources. So therefore, careful planning and execution are the key to a successful OBE implementation. In other words, that everything in SPAD's definition, which includes all aspects in the educational process such as curriculum, resources such as classroom, curricular and extracurricular activities, everything, assessment, strategy, activities, materials should be aligned to the projected outcomes of the learners. Simply put it, before any teaching learning activity is started, the teacher must first set the outcomes or the targets or objectives that he intends his learners to manifest. This is the guiding principle of an outcome-based instruction or education. So what are the two types of outcomes? First, we have intermediate outcomes, also referred to as instructional outcomes. These are the qualities, competencies, and skills that the graduates have achieved after finishing either a program, course, or learning outcomes. Some of the examples would be ability to solve mathematical problems, competence in speaking and writing, or ability to do a research project. The second type of outcomes is the deferred outcomes. These are abilities, competencies, or skills that the graduates may have achieved or acquired several years after completing the degree program. So might be during their professional work. So what are the levels of outcomes-based instruction? The implementation of outcomes-based education lies in the clear alignment of the institutional outcomes, the program outcomes, the course outcomes, the learning outcomes, and its alignment to all assessment goals. Therefore, it is necessary that these OBE levels must be consistent with one another. So what are institutional outcomes? These are the wider or the widest outcomes. These are statements that express what the graduates of a certain institution are expected to become after graduation, narrowed in by the program outcomes. So these programs outcomes are specific to the particular degree. So for example, outcomes for education, outcomes for agricultural students, program outcomes for engineering students, program outcomes for HM students. These are statements that express the students' outcomes after completing a certain degree or program. So from these program outcomes, we tailor our course outcomes. So what are course outcomes? Course outcomes are some more specific than the program outcomes. These are statements that indicate what students should be able to do or perform after taking a specific course or subject. So within a program, take note there are courses or subjects. So course outcomes, these are outcomes based on the subject. Narrowing down, we have the learning outcomes. So each course outcomes have specific learning outcomes. So what are learning outcomes? Learning outcomes are statements that explain what students can do after a specific lesson or topic. So first, you need to think of the general outcomes. These are the institutional outcomes. Narrowing it down, specifying them, you will need to produce the program outcomes, or you need to think about the program outcomes. Then consider the course outcomes, then the more specific ones, the learning outcomes. So what are the characteristics of an outcomes-based education? We actually have 3 characteristics. First, it should be student-centered. Everything that is done in an institution or in a classroom would always put the student at the center of the entire learning process. Focus should be on what the students are expected to know and do. Therefore, learning activities have to be designed in a way that these expected outcomes are achieved. Next, OBE should be faculty-driven. Teachers take on different roles as they assign or design teaching learning activities that are unique to a specific learning outcome. Some of these roles, to mention a few, may be the teachers being a facilitator, a mentor, a trainer, a demonstrator, an assessor, a coach, or whichever is appropriate for a particular learning outcome. And lastly, OBE should be meaningful. OBE teachers are reflective of their entire teaching process because they make use of any data or information they could collect about their students in designing succeeding teaching, learning, and/or assessment activities. In assessing students' achievements, teachers are constantly guided by checking the constructive alignment among learning outcomes, teaching learning activities, and assessment activities. All these three should be aligned. Also, teachers make use of their assessment criteria in measuring students' outputs or outcomes. The assessment criteria or the rubric are provided to the students before they are engaged in the activities so that they are informed on the expectations set by the teachers from them. Next, what are SPADE's 4 operating principles of outcomes-based instruction? So according to SPADE, if these 4 operating principles are followed consistently by the educators and the academic leaders, the implementation of outcomes-based education could be a success. So first, clarity of focus. All educators must be aware of the outcomes of each student and be able to translate this at the classroom level while being guided by the higher outcomes such as the program and institutional level. Also, in achieving the classroom level outcomes, teachers must refer to the learning outcomes so that appropriate assessment tasks and teaching learning activities are consciously designed. This alignment is called constructive alignment. Second, high expectations. In designing assessment tasks that target higher outcomes, teachers must design measures that activate HOTS or higher order thinking skills and are authentic or highly reflective of the real-life scenarios. This may be done through demonstration, simulations, or performance assessments to name a few. In so doing, students are then prepared for actual work life. Third, expanded opportunity. As explained by SPADE, all students can learn and succeed, but not on the same day and the same way. That is why teachers need to provide expanded opportunity for students to profess or demonstrate the learning outcomes. This expanded opportunity may include the time dimension, whereby students may be allowed to do remedial, make-up, or practice tests. Also, the mode in which the assessment task is given may be diversified based on different learning styles. This is when teachers may consider the varied learning or thinking styles of their students as well as the multiple intelligences. Reminded by Einstein's statement that everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. This means that we need to be careful in the choice of assessment. It should be aligned to the OBE or to the outcome. It should consider students' strengths and weaknesses and the lessons you shared to them. Next, principle of OBE is the design down. So OBE follows the top-down approach to teaching as well as assessment, while the traditional education uses the bottom-up approach where teachers teach concepts, then create quizzes based on these lessons, and lastly, design end-of-term tasks as a measure of students' learning. In the top-down approach or in the OBE, the teacher begins with the end in mind. He first defines the end result, what he wants his students to demonstrate after the course, then he designs the final assessment to measure these outcomes, followed by the identification of the teaching learning activities that may be used to help the students achieve the specified outcomes. So there you go. So before we leave this lesson, I will share you this quote. To begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you are going so that you better understand where you are now and so that the steps you take are always in the right direction. So this has been Jennifer B. Carillo. I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you for watching.